Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. The Invisible Wheelchair Podcast was selected by FeedSpot as one of the top 10 obsessive-compulsive disorder podcasts. I'm Donald Grodoff, EFT tapping practitioner and OCD coach at FamilyOCD.com. On the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, I focus on the hidden world of OCD and anxiety with interviews and information around this topic. My purpose is to bring about awareness of OCD, those who treat OCD, and of course, those who suffer with OCD. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is a treatable and manageable disorder. In my practice at FamilyOCD.com, I guide people through the process of ERP therapy and other alternative treatments. If you know of someone suffering with OCD, simply visit FamilyOCD.com. If you or someone you know suffers or has suffered and recovered from OCD and would like to get their story out, simply contact us through www.invisiblewheelchair.com. We want to talk to you and get your story out on the podcast. Know that the ideas and thoughts presented here are not necessarily those of Family OCD, Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, or Donald Grodoff. We also ask you to take just a few moments and leave comments at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Those comments help us to know what the next topic should be, and we really want to hear from you. Now, let's get to that podcast. This podcast was recorded August 21st, 2020. This is podcast number 47, Psilocybin, Should We Be Tripping on This? Well, I had never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be talking about psychedelic compounds and drugs. I went through growing up in the 60s when that was a big thing, 60s, even the 70s. Psychedelic drugs, tripping on LSD, all these different things were in the news and happening in time. And so, again, never thought I'd be talking about it, but I wanted to bring this to an awareness. I'm not here promoting any of this, but I wanted to bring it to awareness because it is something that's happening right now that looks pretty positive to help in the world of OCD for those that are suffering from OCD. Psilocybin is, and I'm going to read this from Wikipedia just to give you an idea. Psilocybin is a naturally occurring psychedelic prodrug compound produced by more than 200 species of mushrooms, collectively known as psilocybin mushrooms. Now, that comes straight from Wikipedia. But it was interesting that when I was going down the path to my next podcast, trying to think about what should I be putting out there for awareness in this podcast. Yesterday, as I was preparing to do this podcast, as I was driving, coming back from somewhere, I heard a really interesting article on NPR about how they're looking back at psychedelic drugs, psychedelic compounds for mental illness issues. And I thought it was rather interesting because they made it sound much safer and much more effective than they did back in the day when like I said, back in the 60s, psychedelic drugs were dangerous, LSD, tripping on LSD, all of this kind of stuff was, promoted differently, very differently. And I don't believe that it is just the best thing for you to be able to do it just recreational. But from what I'm seeing in the research I've done a little bit. I haven't done an extraordinary amount of research on it, but I've been looking through some different things. I looked at Dr. Joseph McCullough website, and he really brings out a lot of good information about it. Apparently, there's been quite a few studies done on it. He mentions one that was done at King's College in London about what they call the magical mushroom, uh, and finding it safe for human consumption, but also finding that there's been enough studies with it showing really good effects for things like depression, even things like OCD and mental illness, that the FDA has designated psilocybin treatment as a breakthrough therapy, which what they're saying in here is that that can then fast track it to becoming an approved drug for use with mental illness. And there's also been studies done. There was a study done at in 2006 at the University of Arizona, which there they found that the psilocybin helped temporarily reduce symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. And that, again, what we I think we look for as somebody that's been around the OCD personally with my children, you look for any hope you can get to get you through. Not that this is going to be something that you're going to run out and try to find these mushrooms or whatever, but that it gives you some hope that this will not necessarily go on forever. And sometimes when you get into that place, you find that hopelessness that keeps you from driving forward, when it gets to be like we've been dealing with OCD issues between two kids for the last probably 10 or 12 years, and it gets to be really exhausting to keep going, to keep finding some kind of hope in it. And we have, I think, through the work we've done with ERP, with my EFT tapping work I do, we have been able to break through to find enough hope to keep us moving forward and to know that we're a much better place than we were years ago. So I give this information for more than anything for some hope to know that there are things that are coming down the pike, but there are ways of getting through OCD. But what this psilocybin, from what I'm understanding in the studies I've done, and uh, I would suggest for you to do your own studies on it, your own research on it, to keep in tune with it so you can follow what's going on, so that when it does become approved, that you may be able to use that to help your OCD person out. And by the way, just to let you know, it is spelled Psilocybin, psilocybin. And they talk about psilocybin mushrooms because it does come from a variety of mushrooms. What they're saying too is that we're having kind of this psychedelic renaissance, which they're finding hallucinogenic compounds like psilocybin are viewed as potential therapeutic agents to treat mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. They even talk about eating disorders. And then of course, the biggie is depression and anxiety. And of course, if you think about it with OCD, if we can get anxiety down, our depression down, it can be a big help in getting past OCD or getting, and I don't say cure, that if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know that I am not one to say cure. It's really more about managing, becoming very manageable. And what I'm understanding, this is a real basic, because again, I'm not a scientist in this either, and I'm not a doctor. So these are just bringing this stuff out for awareness, not for suggestive, not for um, prescribing or anything like that. It is really just to become aware of this issue, that it could be something down the road that could help you. But the way I'm understanding the psilocybin, I keep saying psilocybin is that it works with the F, 5-HT2A serotonin receptors. In other words, it's affecting the serotonin receptors, which are a huge part in what OCD is about. Improper balances of serotonin can really be trigger effects for OCD. And what this does is it goes in to attach to those serotonin receptors and help them to kind of change and alter how they're receiving things. It also affects the different areas, the connection. In OCD, different areas of the brain start looping with information. So they're going around in circles in different. Again, this is a very general description. And what I understand from what I've read on this is that it is affecting those connections so that it helps to slow or to stop those looping effects. I think it's really amazing what it can do. Now, they do say that it is similar to LSD, but they find that it's non-addictive, that it's safe on the body, and that it does have pretty strong effect on these different illnesses, anxiety, the OCD, etc. So you may want to look up some of these studies. Like I said, the College of Medicine in Tucson uh, did an interview with Dr. Francisco Moreno and Brian Baez, and they talk a lot about the different aspects of this psilocybin and its effect with OCD. That's where I found a lot of my information. So again, it's something that I'm not here promoting it, but to make you aware. It's part of what's could be coming that could make some big changes in OCD. You know, they're talking about the FDA is now involved in speeding this up because I think it's true we're going through with all the things going on right now. For those of you that might be listening to this somewhere in the future, you know, we're going through a pandemic with the coronavirus right now, which is causing so many different things. It's causing illness and death because of the virus, but it's also causing many of the mental illness by the fact that we're secluded, that we're quarantined, that we're really boxed in. We're not, everything has turned upside down. And mental illness becomes more flared up in these type of situations. And so these kind of things can be a very big bonus to being able to resolve those issues and do it in a more natural means. From what I've seen so far, I have not seen anything talking about dramatic side effects with it. Everything seems to be coming about safe with this. So again, I bring this about for awareness, for those that are suffering with OCD or mental illness, to be aware of this, to follow this, to look up psilocybin. Again, Psilocybin, and get connected with it and keep in touch with it. I looked on the IOCD Foundation website, and I did a search for that, and so they don't speak of it yet, so I don't know. I'm going to keep an eye on that to see what they come up with, what they say on it, try to put out some information to see if they've done any research or study or work on it. And that would be something I would recommend for you is to keep an eye there. So again, this is brought about for your awareness, and hopefully, again, not to necessarily suggest it because that's not in my power, but to know that so far what it's showing is some pretty powerful effects and yet safe at the same time. So again, I hope this has been helpful for you and that you keep on working towards advocating for OCD and its different prospects for managing and solving this issue. So, take care. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.